And as we move forward through the day, as I said before, we are going to have a few co-hosts with us. And our first co-host, who I'm going to welcome to the stage, is Bruno Giussani. Bruno grew up in the Ticino. That's on the other side of the mountains, but is truly a world citizen. I first met Bruno at TED Global in 2005, where he was and still is the curator of TED Global. And somehow we both found also a resonance about the future and about change and how do you convene to make change. And he is truly one of the most masterful conveners and curators and hosts. He's curating TED Countdown. How many of you know TED Countdown? Okay, that's your second piece of homework. We've got the Shackleton video and TED Countdown in 2. It's really trying to take a look at, and maybe Bruno, you can explain that a tiny bit. And he's also the curator of the Geneva Film Festival, or part of the Geneva Film Festival. So he's truly a multifaceted individual, and he's a member of the Your 2040 co-design team, who's helped design the content and been a great friend and sort of an advisor. And he's just a great human. So let us welcome Bruno Giussani to the stage.
Thank you, Chris.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm actually surprised at how calmly we are discussing about urgency, but maybe it's just because we are all feeling, I don't know, the lack of oxygen for the altitude or something like that. So the idea here is to have a conversation with two people about, of course, what they think about urgency, but also about some strategies to go forward, some solutions, really looking forward a little bit. One is Reto Knutti from ETH. I don't know where he is, but I saw him before with a mic. Come up, Reto. And the other is Marie-Claire Graf, who's also mic'd up and there in the back. Come up, Marie-Claire. Woo! You take that one, yeah. So, Marie-Claire is a young activist, and she actually is leading YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency of the UN climate change group, which means that she has direct ties into COP26 and this kind of things. Reto is a scientist. He leads the climate physics group at ETH in Zurich, where Chris works too. I thought that we would just ask Reto first, just to set the question of the urgency with some data, literally very, very short in 3 bullet points. Remind us the latest about the science, IPCC and so on. Where are we now? Really 3 bullet points.
How much time do we have?
Ooh, sorry.
Well, the latest report just came out a few weeks ago, the 6th assessment report after 30 years of climate reports. And at some point my wife asked me, so what's the story, the summary? And I said, I told you so. I mean, basically we're just reinforcing and getting more detail on the things we've kind of known for 50 years or so, right? The Earth is warming, the ice is melting, CO2 is rising, humans are almost completely responsible for the changes we're seeing, and the damages are obvious. It's everywhere. So we're kind of screwed up in 2 ways, namely that things are going fast, but what worries me more is that we're unable to respond to that as a society. I think that worries me almost more because we've seen this for like decades now.
Okay, but in the dark of the 6 reports and the decades, never the science was so explicitly conclusive, right? Literally the first line of the executive summary says, use the word unequivocal, which was never used before in an report. So, and that clears the table of many discussions and many controversies. At least it should clear the table of many discussions and controversies about the state of things. But of course, the question is, we have these facts. How do we translate those into action? What do we do with these facts? Right? And I think that is a question for both of you from your different perspectives. So the facts are on the table. Many people still doubt them. Some others believe them, but they actually don't adapt with their action, their choices, and so on to what those facts say. So my first question is maybe, do you think we really understand the meaning, the deep meaning of words like climate change, like global heating, like ocean acidification, or we understand them only in vocabulary sense and not for what they mean? Because if we understood really for what they mean, they should prompt a completely different change in behavior. So maybe Claire first and then Reto.
Yeah, sure. I think you mentioned it very well. We understand it here because this is how we are taught about climate change, but we don't understand it in our hearts. And that's why it's so hard for some people to act, because we are not allowed to show emotions. We are not allowed to be different or be very passionate about something. It's good if you know it here, you know the physics behind it. I've also been studying it. But I think to make the changes we need, these unprecedented changes, these unprecedented actions, this transformation, we need to work with our hearts, and many of us have been mentioning this already before about the urgency. And I think this is what we have to encourage ourselves, but also others, to be able to do more action leading with our hearts, with our empathy, with our passion, with our emotions.
Reto, same question for you, but knowing also that you work in science communication, so you project what you and other scientists do outside to the rest of the world.
Just a word on the unequivocal. The fourth assessment report in 2000 said warming of the climate system is unequivocal in the summary for policymakers, so that it's not that new. We kind of understand it in an abstract sense, but I think humans are not very good, first of all, in making decisions based on abstract numbers. If it's not real, if we have never experienced it, it's like the kids when they put their hand on the hot stove. I mean, you can tell them as many times as you want it's going to be hot, but at some point they will touch it and then they will know. The problem is we haven't, in some areas, we haven't experienced yet. And the other is that, as I always stress again and again, the scientific facts and the numbers, they do not dictate political action or measures. Right? And we disagree sometimes about the facts, but even if we agreed on the facts and the numbers, we might still disagree on what should be done about them. And the pandemic is a good example. I mean, the numbers are one thing, but what to do about it is the other one. So I think we're missing the solutions, the ideas, and the stories to move from the facts to the action.
So how do we develop that? What's the right kind of story that should be told?
I don't know. I mean, so I often quote Kahneman, who said, nobody ever made a decision because of a number, they need a story. And the story is, of course, not a story about the person, but it's a kind of a vision of what we're trying to achieve. I think there are different stories, and there are different storytellers. And many people here are much better positioned to tell those stories than the physicist sitting here, because the people believing in or engaged in the church, or the people interested in arts or in architecture, they have different stories in mind, right? The entrepreneur has another story, and the financial expert has maybe a fourth story. So I think we need targeted, and that links to what Tim has said before, right? You need targeted stories that kind of engage people in something they could see as a way forward.
Marie-Claire, somebody before there on the back used the word panic. And they reminded me of Greta Thunberg going to Davos and say, I don't want you to have hope, I want you to panic because our house is on fire. And there is a story in the younger generation, which you represent here, about panic. And then there is another story which is about action and solution. How do those two stories live in your generation's activism today?
Yeah, it's panic. It's also anger, it's a lot of frustration, it's depression, also mental health coming up. I see a lot of young people really being so passionate, including myself, but also having so much fear, right? And I think this is something which we also should embrace more, like allowing these emotions to come up and also show these emotions, because I do not think that we will bridge this to like the solutions, the innovation, especially also like the technological innovations, if we do not let our true inner self come out. And I think also young people very often are told like, oh no, don't be so emotional, like come, let's stick to the facts, right? But then we are again back what you said. if you just stick to the facts, we are not creating these stories. And I think what young people should do is really like talking more out of their hearts with their emotions, but also having more this transformative vision. Because if we are in the IPC report, is also stated what we need is an unprecedented transformation. But how can we have an unprecedented transformation if we are using the same old language over and over again, and we are recycling the words which has been used for decades already by another generation, by also a very small margin of our society? And I think we need to empower each other. We have to learn from young people, but we also have to learn from other generations on using this language again and approach things differently. And this is how we can merge these two worlds. And it's working already. We see this, it's working. But we need to scale it up, right? We see it in small pieces. We see it sometimes on the sidelines in the World Climate Conference, but it's not yet reaching the negotiation halls. It's not yet reaching the decision-making halls where we have this, scaling up, this ripple effects coming. And I think this is where this needs to translate in. And I think all of us here can be one of these ripple effects when we are talking to people who are taking decisions.
So I'm talking to a lot of scientists and technologists, entrepreneurs and funders and investors lately, because I'm putting up this conference that Chris mentioned before, TED Countdown in 3 weeks. And I have a sense that a lot of them are starting to buy into a different kind of story. 15, 20 years ago, we would actually put out a story of urgency and say, things are really not going well. We are facing a possibly dramatic future. And so it was a story of risk and fear and so on. And then we would start figuring out what to do or what could we do, and we could imagine things, but we could imagine things in the abstract because we didn't really have the tools and the technologies and the means to actually create that potential, let's call it clean future. Now we do have most of that. Now we have, wind and solar which are cheaper than fossil fuels. We have better computer models that make understand things, but also help develop new materials. We have finance that finally understands that it can redirect itself in different directions. So there are a lot of pieces in place, it seems to me, for that curve to change direction. I don't know whether you feel the same thing and whether you sense that, and where do you see the successes currently? Are there successes that you already see?
I think there's a lot of things that are available, but we're lacking the political and societal will to implement things, because we discussed last night in our group with the longest name that I can't remember anymore.
I got it for you. Right in the third.
And we said, what's the biggest problem? The four biggest environmental problems is that humans are a bit stupid, they're a bit lazy, short-sighted, and selfish. And we all are. It's just too convenient to do things as we've done them before. A lot of people make money out of the current system. So there is, for us at least, here in Switzerland, let's be honest, we're not going to die from climate change tomorrow, so there is no absolute need to change. There's too many forces that keep us in the current system. I agree we could change, but we don't want to, or at least not enough.
Wait, Bruno, before you, I want to write these down. The stupid, we're all stupid, short-sighted, lazy, and
selfish.
Oh, selfish. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
That's going to go into the report, right?
Yeah. Thanks. Right.
I said that in a TV interview just before the vote on the CO2 law, and I got heavily criticized for the stupid. People said, I am not stupid, I have my reasons.
All the others are fine, right? you lazy people out there, come on.
But I think there is an element, right? There is an element in all of these four.
Marie-Claire saying on the same point.
I think while we have a lot of technological innovations, we should focus more on the social innovations, because we can invent, of course, better planes and we can invent better cars. But then if you're just using it more and more often, you're putting more light bulbs up there, it's not going to change. And if the challenge we are facing, the urgency is unprecedented, we cannot just innovate and make it a little bit more efficient, because this is not going to change the world. This is not what we call as unprecedented. And I do believe that we should focus more, or at least an equal focus, on social innovation. How can we live and do things differently? And maybe you have read there is a report that if we all would work less, I mean, people who can afford to work less, and it actually is one of the biggest solutions to the climate crisis. But what we are doing, we are just working all more efficiently, that we can produce even more and more and more. And this is exactly bringing us even deeper into the mess we're already in. And I think this is exactly what I mentioned before. If we would also take the time, and I'm very happy that we have this, thank you Chris, at this conference, time to reflect, because we never have this, for example, at the World Climate Conference. Everyone is just so busy not reflecting. If you have this time to reflect and trying to really feel what needs to change, I think we can actually do it. But we have to take this time off, and this is so hard in today's society, because when you're taking time off, you're like, why are you not working? I mean, like, what are you doing with your time? Why are you not delivering? And I think this is a very weird kind of mindset, and one has really fight for the right of being able to reflect, of being able to go to nature, to reconnect to nature, and to all the things we have been mentioning before. And this shouldn't be the case. We should encourage each other and should embrace each other for taking this time to heal, to overcome anxieties, to support each other.
Now, of course, if you look at the issue from, say, Asia or Africa, then we would have a different kind of,
absolutely.
Approach. But let me ask you another thing, because I think we all know the IPCC and you all know what scientists do here, but probably nobody knows Yango and what you do and what that organization builds into the diplomatic and climate discussion process. So tell us in brief what is the organization and what it does and what you do in there.
Yes, and just first, I mean, all what I'm saying comes from a reflected but still very privileged position, being a white girl growing up in Switzerland, having able to the education you just mentioned, going to ETH, and I try in my work with Yango, where we are defending the interest of young people in the international climate negotiations. It's a network of thousands of people from 180 countries, trying to defend this interest in the international negotiation, and with this bringing in the voices of young people who are able to be in the room but not sitting at a table when decisions are taken. So this is what we are doing, to try to bring in this perspective, because very often exactly these views are excluded and they need to be heard.
What are you bringing this to COP26 in a month?
Yes, exactly. So we are all at the World Climate Conference, but also in between, because at the end, I mean, these big conferences, the decisions are already predefined, right? You come there to take a decision. Of course, there is some bargaining, some negotiations, but the real decisions are taken in advance. That's right. We work throughout the year with young people all around the globe together to try to implement these changes. And we see some success, but it's not yet leveling up to the urgency we would need.
Okay, let's see if there are questions from this crowd. I think we still have microphones, right? Yes. One there in the back. Anyone else, just raise your hand so we can get the microphone to you.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
And Harris.
Hi.
And a question to Reto. How to avoid to be put in a certain political party context. I mean, let's face it, what we talk about is easier to find a common ground with the Green Party than with the far right? How to navigate through this very complicated political landscape in Switzerland, also globally, geopolitically. And this is where communication comes into the game. And of course we have our scientific vocabulary, but we need also to, I think Benjamin, you mentioned Mandela and people's language, etc. So how to juggle, to reaching all the stakeholders and how to sort of move through this very complicated political landscape and still keep the integrity and the legitimacy we have as scientists and practitioners.
That's a hard one. I don't think you can fully. Inevitably, if you say what I say, you're going to be put into the left part of the spectrum, where, of course, I am to some extent. But I can try to maintain a relatively objective professional role. And I mean, my kids walk on the streets with the signs. I try to maybe be in the second row or the third row rather than in the front row, because I try to maintain a reasonably objective position, so that in principle I can talk to all kinds of politicians from all sides. It's easier in one part of the spectrum than in the other one, obviously. And I think you can try to tell the story in a sense that you don't point at people and saying you're wrong, but you try to lay out the facts. And as I said, the facts do not dictate the political actions. There's a lot of value judgments and ideologies and personal interests, lobbyists, whatever. Let people make their own judgment and try not to prescribe it too much. And then I think it's to some extent working. And the other thing is maybe the personal aspect. If you in the media it's harder, but if you actually talk to people face to face, then you can build common ground. So I now talk to Albert Rösti from SVP face to face, and it's okay, right? We get along.
No blood. Reto, I have the impression that we have a lot of dichotomies in the discourse, for and against clean energy, for and against climate, for and against a moral or ethical approach. I have the impression rather that it simplifies down to pro-business and anti-business. A lot of people think that any measure that deals with climate positively is an anti-business measure, and a lot of others think that business is just this kind of extracting, usurping entity that will never get things right. And then in the middle somehow there is that division. Is it a wrong impression? Is it a correct impression? That's the central tension?
The economists have estimated that it's far easier and cheaper to fix the problem rather than to wait for things to go wrong and then fix it later. So the most expensive thing to do is to do nothing. And I think it's getting traction in the governments and in the bigger companies that it's better to start now. But of course, in the very short term, it's still more attractive to do nothing. So that's where things are. I tend to think we need to rethink the way the systems, the values, the big questions we're talking about today. But we're not going to change the system tomorrow. So I try also to see what are the options that we could change within the current system. And that's simply, as you said, renewable energy. I mean, there's lots of things we can change in the current system, and we absolutely need to do that as soon as possible. We cannot wait to change the complete political system, because then it's going to be too late.
Michael, you have a question? You have a mic? Yes.
Great, thank you. So I've been following the environmental movement since I was a teenager, and I've seen it engage in a lot of self-criticism. You know, are we too emotional or not emotional enough? Is the science too scary or not scary enough? Have we been too pro-business or anti-business? Have we been too positive or too negative? And there are elements in all of those that could be debated, but I don't think those are getting to the root of the problem. And I think the simple truth is there's been too much resistance from people in power. And if you look at the major social changes that have occurred in history, the last bastion of resistance is normally angry old white men who are indignant about losing their privileges. And if you looked at the demographic of the people that were criticizing Greta Thunberg, that was the only people represented, really. They were the angry old white guys. And you could interpret that positively, because that could be a sign that we're on the cusp of quite major change. But I feel we should probably not engage so much in self-criticism about the way we communicate, and instead really start to dial up the pressure on those who are resisting change.
How?
Well, yeah, I think that's a really good question as well, and I think it's going to involve overwhelming public protest, I think. So I had a meeting recently with the guy that used to be construction advisor to the British government. He sat in rooms with David Cameron and George Osborne and so on. And he was pretty gloomy. He said to me, the planet's screwed. The only hope now is non-violence, civil disobedience. I don't entirely agree with him, but I think we do need major public protests in order to force change to happen. Because there are a lot of people who are just too comfortable.
Okay, let's get 2 microphones here in the front, but don't make it too long because we have only a few minutes. So
I only have a question, actually. How do you stay mentally sane, personally?
How do you stay ethically sane?
Mentally
sane,
because
okay.
I'm so grateful what you do and also what you've been doing for decades, right? And it must be so frustrating to fight and fight and fight. So do you have any tips?
Okay. Well, Reto from the perspective of the multiple decades, and Marie-Claire from the perspective of the anger. So,
I sometimes compare myself or the scientists to the doctor in the emergency room where the patient is lying, and at that point you're not like thinking, oh my God, he's bleeding, oh my God, he's hurt. You just try to save lives. Right? I mean, from a professional point of view, you try to do your job as good as you can, as objectively as you can, and the rest has no space in doing the science. Of course, it's frustrating, and if you have kids, then you get to these moments where you think, oh my God, why are we doing this when we're not getting anywhere? But what are the options? Well, in a sense, we're in a Shackleton position, right? We could either give up and die, or we can fight. And I think that's the only choice we have. We have different roles. I think the scientists have one role. People on the streets have another role, and the entrepreneurs have another role, but everybody can contribute in one or the other way.
Marie-Claire, same question.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to realize that there is something like eco-anxiety or the fear of the climate collapse and so on, and also like realize how and when you feel it. I know when I'm feeling it and also how I combat it. So I'm every week, like one day I'm like off my phone, my laptop, I'm just outside and doing things differently, but also build your own community where you can trust and just be yourself and say if you're not feeling well, you don't have to pretend to smile and say like I'm all good, but also when you have a public speaking opportunity or something, just be able to say that things are going very, very bad and be emotional. Like for me, one of my first panels in the international scene, I had to cry and I was so embarrassed because I was just crying and there were like thousands of people in the room, and afterwards people came up and like it just was so transformative that someone could really kind of show this emotion and not only speak about it in a very abstract way. So I think it's really important to also support each other along this way. And with you, I very much agree. And I think it's a very, very important part to build mass mobilization and civil disobedience.
Yeah, and I spoke with an activist today, the other day, and she told me, one of the things that we don't learn as activists is actually stepping back and regenerate ourselves. We need to realize that while we step back, the fight continues with other activists, and then we can join again. So there is a question in the back, and then you, and then you. Yes.
Yep, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect. First of all, I can highly recommend a podcast that is called How to Not Burn Out as a Climate Activist and Climate Scientist. I can share that with you. I listen to it every week, which is great. Marie-Claire, I just came back from the European Forum Eibach, and what you said really triggered me in terms of, young people are told, go out and, get active and go out and vote. But as we look at the demographic, sort of change, we can see that especially in, democratic states that we're all very happy to be able to live in, our voices don't really count compared to, the voices of the older generations. And as you said, we don't really have this kind of, we don't get a seat at the table. I always say also when it comes to gender justice, okay, let's open our new table, which I think we should do because, running behind the older generations, trying to convince them that we should be heard is something very frustrating, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. And second thing, I was co-author of a book, and I said, I think that the future needs a voice in parliament, which is not the case right now. Yeah, maybe you could say something about that, or your thoughts on that.
Because I want to take another
Yes, I can be very short. I think there is a commissioner in Wales who was tasked to bring in the future perspective of the unborn, and I think it's very important. I was once a part of a panel where there was a seat left empty just to reflect on this. And I'm really, really sad that for the World Climate Conference, the UK changed the name because it was Young and Future Generation Day to exactly bring this perspective in, and they now renamed it to Public Empowerment Day, which I think is horrible because it exactly leaves the next generation out. And I think this is a really important aspect to also reflect on the ones, not only the not borns, but also all the other ones who are not sitting at the table. Again, like voting is something really brilliant, but when I'm telling like young people from 180 countries, yeah, go and vote. Most of these young people can't vote, not because of their age, because of their system is not allowing them to vote, especially young female ladies coming from indigenous groups, coming from other minority groups. They're even scared of even talking about politics because it could already actually have like really harsh consequences on them. And I think there we need other ways of expressing ourselves. And there is a saying, I don't know who said it, but if there is no chair given to you, just bring your own chair and sit at the table. And it's exactly what we are doing in Yango, what you mentioned before. We are taking our seat and not waiting until it's given to us.
Yeah. Can you bring a microphone here? Short question, short answer, please.
Yes, thank you. So regarding non-violent protests or other, if you were like me following, for instance, protests in Russia from 2012 to now, you would notice that you start from non-violent processes and that leads to hierarchies, entrenching and developing like force organs and the vicious circle that just lead to kind of encapsulating of this hierarchy. Another proposition maybe here is that, like Winston Churchill say, we design our buildings and thereafter they design us. So there's quite a lot of building environment professionals here. Could we start thinking about built environment maybe as a tool that we can design maybe in such a concealed way, but anyways, we could design in such a way that would undermine the hierarchies in principle.
How to undermine the existing hierarchies? Let's take that. Who wants to take that?
I don't think I have an answer to that, but
not
maybe
violent process. Okay, let's
someone else has it.
There was another. Yes, go ahead. Last question.
It was maybe a comment. I understood earlier that you said that you know there's a certain system and it's relatively hard to change it and it will take time. I really disagree to this. I think entrepreneurs are creating their own systems, right? I mean, when you have, for example, cars being built in Germany and in the United States and wherever and in Asia, and now they're being built completely differently in a completely different concept. So basically, you create your own company. I don't want to make any. You can be a fan or not a fan of Mr. Musk, but he's creating his own world. So he's also creating his own system. So I think we shouldn't accept there is a system. We should just recreate our own system.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't say that it's impossible to change it. Of course, there are. I mean, the cars are an example where things are attractive, and you can change the system because you make money. And probably the electric car is taking over, no matter what we do politically. But in other areas, there's too many incentives and too many people who are in power who profit from the current system that it's harder to change. It's not impossible. But as we have shown, for 50 years plus, it's tough to change.
Okay. There's another system, which is the countdown clock that tells us that we don't have time anymore for this session. So thank you, Marie-Claire. Thank you, Reto. Back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno.